Today we'll be talking about a book that was considered filth by Adolf Hitler, a book that was hated among the masses, a book that labeled its author a pornographer. As you guys probably know, I'm talking about Dream Story by Arthur Schnitzler. This book was written in the 1920s, and Hitler himself, the good old anti-Semite, had labeled Arthur Schnitzler as a filthy Jew. In many ways, Arthur Schnitzler was very much outcast from the literary world, but he was really renowned and quite liked in the psychoanalytic world. Freud himself really found a bit of a kinship with Schnitzler. So before I tell you guys more about this book, I will tell you about the movie adaptation. The movie adaptation for this book was Eyes Wide Shut, which was directed by Stanley Kubrick and starred Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise. So between the book and the movie, there isn't really much of a difference. Everything that happens in this book pretty much happens in the movie. So if you're a really big fan of the movie, or you watched the movie and you liked it, or whatever the case is, you should definitely read this book. Now, this book in particular wasn't my most favorite book. It's not like the book of the century for me. It is in many ways a very aesthetic novel. It's a very decadent novel, and I do enjoy those novels, or rather novella, because it's so short. Specifically, Story of the Eye by Georges Bataille. When I think of decadence, when I think of aesthetics, I think of that book. And it's so grand, and it's so full of imagery that just burns into your mind and it won't leave. This book doesn't have all that imagery. So although this book gets pegged as being very decadent, full of imagery, it doesn't do it for me as Story of the Eye did. But I'm not really necessarily here just to talk about the comparisons between the two. I do want to talk about the book in itself. The book follows a young couple who have a daughter, Fridolin and Albertine, or Albertina, depending on the translation that you have. The book follows Fridolin in one night while he tends to one of his patients who is on his deathbed, gets confronted by a prostitute, finds himself in a sex cult club ball, and then finds himself back home with his wife, who tells him about his dream that disturbs him so much. The book in many ways explores the complexities of marriage, or just having a long-term relationship and still feeling sexual feelings towards other people who are outside of your relationship. In many ways, lots of people, when they talk to a married couple who've been married for a number of years, they just think to themselves that, like, they're so faithful to each other. But a really good thing to remember is that, you don't go numb from the neck down when you're married. Like, you don't necessarily stop having feelings for other people. You don't stop being attracted to other people. You don't, stop flirting a little bit with other people. And the book explores that, but it explores it in a way with dreams. So this whole idea of dreams pretty much opens up when Albertine tells Fridolin that she's been having fantasies or dreams about a boy that she was once in love with, pretty much her first love before she married Fridolin. Fridolin is a bit like, what? You're having sexual fantasies about people who aren't me? Like, that's ridiculous. And he gets a little bit upset. So that's when he begins to go down this path of wanting to engage in sex with other people who aren't his wife. Because logic, right? When he is called by one of his patients to tend to her father, who is on his deathbed, he goes, and unfortunately he's a little bit too late. Her father dies, but he begins to notice the woman's facial features. He begins to notice how attractive she is, even though she's a little bit older. He, notices her pale skin and her fiery red lips, which is something that is alluded to so many times in the novel. Pale skin, red lips. And although he has this moment with this woman, He then finds himself back out on the street walking along, and then he gets confronted by a prostitute whom he has a very close encounter with, almost has sex with her until he stops her and basically is just like, I can't do this, you know, you're so young. She was like 17, and he not necessarily felt bad, but he just didn't want to have sex with her for whatever reason, right? Like he kind of felt this bit of anxiety and he just didn't really want to do it, even though he did because he was so mad at Albertine. This whole thing. But he finds himself in a bar talking to a piano man. So this piano player man is talking to him about one of his side gigs that he has, where he plays blindfolded in a ballroom, but there's naked women everywhere. So Fridolin, thinking with his dick, is like, where is this place? Like, where can I get tickets? How much are the tickets? Like, I need to know where this place is. And the piano player man is like, dude, you need to be a member. And also, not only that, you need to know the password, which changes every single night. And I don't even know it now because I have to get it from my coach man. Fridolin is being completely unrelenting. He's like, look, I need to get in. I need to see that TNA. I need to know what this place is all about. Finally, the piano player man relents, tells him that you need to get a cloak and a mask, and I don't know if he can find one at 1 a.m. But Fridolin assures him, says, I know the perfect place to get it, that's not a problem. Eventually, the piano player man finds out the password, tells him that it is Denmark, Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark, and goes on his way. Fridolin then finds himself at a costume shop at 1 a.m. because the owner just lets him in for the most part without really much of a fight. As he is picking out his cloak and his mask, a young girl runs towards him and he receives her in his arms, and she looks quite frightened but also very enticing. But he notices that her father is getting pretty upset, and then turn over this way, there's two men who are pretty much like naked who are having their way with her. And her father gets all upset, pretending like as if he doesn't know what's happening, even though it's pretty clear that she's probably a prostitute, or rather her father is prostituting her to older men. Anyways, Fridolin is like, what's going on? And like, don't cause any harm to her. Kind of like tells him like the whole thing, like, I'm a doctor and I know what's right for this young girl. And her father's like, dude, shut up. I don't need to hear you talk about my business. No. So this really bizarre encounter is just bizarre, right? You're like, what is going on? And pretty much the exact same thing happens in the movie. But all of a sudden, it's like as if that doesn't exist because now he's at the ball. So he goes in the sex cult club ball thing, and right away, a woman is right behind him and whispers in his ear, you don't belong here and you need to leave. And he's all like, brushes her off. And she persists. Like, they've already caught on to you. You have to go, otherwise they will threaten your life. And he's like, girl, shut up. You know why I'm here. For the naked chicks. So he stays for a bit, but of course, they begin to realize that this guy doesn't belong here. He's not one of them. But who is them? Who are these people who are having sex behind a mask? All so confusing. But like I said, they do catch on. So they tell him, like, you have to leave, you have to get out of here. And you know, Fridolin is just like, you know, standing his ground. He's at his post and he's like, no, like, I want to chill out here. I want to be a part of this. And they're like, no, we will kill you. And they threaten his life, and they threaten one of the other girls' lives. So he finds his way out of there, and he's a bit shaken up, but he ends up going home at around 4 a.m. and he finds Albertine in bed, who is not quite awake, but not quite asleep. But she is awake enough to tell him about the dream that she had. It was a dream in which Fridolin chose to be faithful to Albertine, but Albertine laughed and mocked him so much so that she decided to have sex with somebody else just to spite him. Fridolin is completely disturbed by the whole matter, and he feels like this anxiety. He feels this betrayal instantly because of a dream. That's kind of weird, isn't it? The whole novella, the whole story explores relationships, but also dreams within those relationships. It's very apt to call this dream story because you don't know what's happening within this one night, this one strip of this man's life. Is it all a dream? Is it all reality? You don't really know, because in many ways, some dreams, they kind of meld into reality. My personal experience with dreams is that so many of my dreams are mundane that a lot of times when I wake up, I'm like, I don't know if this actually happened or not, because it could very well have happened. It's just, it feels like a distant memory, but I don't know if it was a dream. And I don't know if you guys have those kinds of dreams where you're not really sure if it happened or not. When you're looking inside of Fridolин's experience, a lot of what he is going through are things that could happen, but things that don't normally happen every single day. Like, for example, being confronted by a prostitute. That could happen, but how often does that happen? All of a sudden, being in the middle of a sex cult club ballroom ball doesn't happen that often, but it could happen. And then seeing a young girl possibly being prostituted by her father doesn't always happen, but it could happen. So this whole entire thing is just the idea that so much of this could be reality, but just as well, so much of this could be a dream. It could be a dream melded into reality. And it gets confusing, and it's very hazy and fever dreamish in many ways, because you don't know if this is all a reality or if this is all a dream. As I was kind of referring to near the beginning of the video, Schnitzler was in correspondence with Freud, who was of course a psychoanalyst who had written the interpretation of dreams. So I'm sure a lot of you guys probably know all about Freud and all about his psychoanalysis, his whole idea of the Oedipus and Electra complex. One of his most influential works is talking about dreams and what they mean. A lot of times, you know, we always kind of make the joke in psych, which is like, you dreamt about hammering some meat. It was obviously the fact that, you know, you wanted to like fuck your father. Crazy shit like that, right? Like, you know, you're just like making fun of the whole thing with Freud. Like, everything reverts back to sex, and sometimes everything reverts back to having an attraction to one of your parents. But Freud was a very special case though. And I think Schnitzler and Freud in many ways influenced each other with their ideas of dreams, especially Schnitzler, because he talked a lot about dreams, but he also talked a lot about sex. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Schnitzler kept a journal of every sexual interaction or transaction that he had ever had, down to every single orgasm that he's ever had. So in many ways, you can kind of see Schnitzler in this whole idea of dreams and sex and anxieties with your partner and feeling betrayal, even though it's something that isn't real. But his betrayal, is it real? Is it fantasy? What is it, right? Like, the fact that, you know, he had every intention to cheat on his wife, but did he cheat on his wife, or was it a fantasy? But regardless, the whole thing was a catalyst of what his wife revealed to him, which was she had a sexual fantasy. Big fucking deal. Like, I think it's so normal to have fantasies, even if they're not of your partner. Sometimes your partner doesn't always do it for you, and that's okay, and sometimes they do it for you all the time. Regardless of what it is, it's not abnormal to think of somebody sexually. You know, if you work with someone, you're like, they're fine. But, you know, you're married. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're like cheating on them because you find the other person attractive. Regardless of what some people may say, I feel like there are some people out there who are just like, even if you flirt, even if you think of somebody else, that's pretty much cheating. It's not. Like I said at the beginning of this video, you know, you're not numb from the neck down. You know, it's not like as if you feel nothing as soon as you're committed. That is never the case. In many ways, I like this novel because of what it explored, but it wasn't enough for me in terms of decadence, in terms of imagery. It didn't have the imagery I think that I was looking for. And I think that it was just because I watched Eyes Wide Shut first. So you know, you're really introduced to that color palette and how beautiful the movie was shot. Like, it was shot so beautifully that, you know, when you're reading the book, there is none of that. And I think that's one of the things that I think other reviewers have talked about, was like they kind of wish that there was more imagery. But regardless, I think it's a really good tale. I think it's really interesting, and I think it's very complex because there is a lot of jealousy. There's a lot of anxiety and betrayal and acts of depravity, whatever it is, but the whole thing that you're kind of left with is this bit of confusion of, is it real or is it fantasy? I think altogether that this book is a book that you can read in one sitting, whether it's in the afternoon or in the evening. I read it in the evening when it was raining. It was pouring like crazy. There was thunder. It was beautiful. It was a really great atmosphere for this book. Regardless, I think that this book is one that you have to read. Whether or not, you know, you love it or you're a bit lukewarm to it or you hate it, I think it's something that you should experience. You know, really analyze and discuss it with other people, because I think it has a lot to offer. I know my husband Damien didn't really like Eyes Wide Shut, so when I was telling him that it was basically exactly the same, he was just like, "Argh." And then we had this whole discussion of fantasies and dreaming of other people and still finding other people attractive. And that's like a perfectly healthy thing to be talking about with your partner. But anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this review. Please let me know down below what you thought. I'd always love to know. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye.